All right, so you know how we always say communication is key? Well, today we're diving deep into a book that takes that idea to a whole new level. It's called Comunicação Nonviolenta, the Portuguese edition of nonviolent communication. And it's all about transforming the way we connect with ourselves and each other.
And get this, the author, Marshall Rosenberg, started his journey toward this communication revolution back in 1943 Detroit.
Talk about a trial by fire. Imagine being a kid surrounded by that level of racial tension.
Yeah, it wasn't just some abstract concept for him, it was his life. And that experience really ignited this quest to understand what fuels violence, what makes people, well, so not peaceful.
And this book is his answer, his roadmap to a less violent world.
You can say that. But it's not just about avoiding physical conflict. It's about transforming the way we speak and listen so we can actually hear each other, even in the heat of an argument.
Okay, that sounds amazing in theory, but let's be real, how often do we actually listen to understand, especially when we're upset or angry?
That's the thing about NVC. It gives you tools to do exactly that. It's like learning a new language, one that's rooted in empathy and compassion.
A new language, huh?
Hmm.
So where do we even begin to learn this NVC lingo?
Well, it all starts with understanding the power of our words. Rosenberg argues that the way we communicate, even in the most casual conversations, can either fuel conflict or foster connection.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example. How can something as simple as the way we talk really make that much of a difference?
Think about it. How often do we hear or say things like, "You always make me late," or "You never listen to me"?
All the time. Guilty as charged. But what's the big deal? I mean, isn't that just how people talk?
Rosenberg would say those seemingly harmless phrases are actually loaded with judgment and blame.
Yeah.
And when we communicate that way, it triggers defensiveness in the other person, and boom, conflict explodes.
So instead of pointing fingers and playing the blame game, NBC is more about taking responsibility for our own feelings and needs, even in the middle of a disagreement.
Exactly. It's about shifting from "you're wrong" to "I feel hurt when this happens because I need."
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could change things. It's like you're taking ownership of your experience without attacking the other person.
Precisely. And when you approach communication from that place, it opens up a whole new world of possibility for connection and understanding. And the really cool part is, this book isn't just some abstract theory. It's packed with real-life examples and practical tools you can use starting today.
Well, in that case, let's dive into those tools. What's the first step on this NVC journey?
Rosenberg breaks it down into 4 key components: observation, feeling, needs, and request. Think of it like a roadmap to navigate even the most challenging conversations.
A roadmap. I like that. So what's our first stop on this communication map?
It all starts with observation. Sounds simple enough, right? But in NVC, observation is about separating what you actually see and hear from your interpretations, judgments, and evaluations.
Okay, hold on. How do I make sure I'm just observing and not accidentally slipping into judgment mode? Give me an example.
All right, imagine you find your roommate's dirty dishes in the sink again. Now, instead of that automatic, "ugh, you never do the dishes," NVC would say hit pause and simply state what you observe. Like, "I'm seeing 3 dishes in the sink."
Ah, okay, so no loaded words, just the facts, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
But how does that get us any closer to, a clean sink?
Because it opens up the conversation without putting the other person on the defensive. You're laying the groundwork for understanding, not launching into an attack. And from there, you can start exploring the feelings and needs tangled up in the situation.
Makes sense. So once we've mastered the art of neutral observation, what's next?
This is where it gets really interesting. We tap into the heart of the matter, feelings. But not just any feelings. We're talking about pure, raw emotions, not thoughts, disguised as feelings.
Okay, so instead of saying, I feel like you don't respect me, which is more of a interpretation, I might say.
You nailed it. Instead of "I feel like," try "I feel disrespected."
Right.
See the difference? It's about owning that feeling without immediately placing blame.
Wow, that is a difference. It goes from accusatory to, like, this is just my honest experience right now.
Precisely. And to make it even clearer, connect that feeling back to your initial observation. For example, "I feel disrespected when I see dishes in the sink after we agreed to share the chores."
Okay, so it's like building a bridge between what I'm seeing and how I'm feeling, all while making sure I'm not pointing fingers. I'm starting to get this. But what about the needs part? Where do those fit into this communication puzzle?
Okay, so we've got the observation, we've got our feelings all laid out, but now we're bringing needs into this. And, this is where it gets really interesting. Because a lot of times we think about communication breaking down like when somebody's needs aren't being met. But we don't actually say that. you know?
Right. We just kind of stew about it resentfully.
Yeah, exactly. And so Rosenberg's real insight here is that every human action, even the ones that drive us crazy, are really just attempts to meet a need.
Okay, so even when my roommate leaves their socks on the floor for the 100th time, it's not about the
It's
socks.
not about the socks,
Yeah.
right? It's about a need that's not being met. It could be a need for comfort. Maybe it's a need to feel free. Maybe even like a misplaced need for attention, but something's going on there.
So it's not about their character, like some moral failing. It's just them trying to get a need met, and I'm over here taking it personally.
Yes. And the more we can kind of step back and see that dynamic, the more we can approach it with understanding and compassion.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually bring these needs into the conversation without sounding like we're giving them a free pass for bad behavior?
Right. So it's not about letting them off the hook. It's about honestly expressing your own needs in relation to what you're observing and feeling. So let's go back to those socks on the floor. Instead of, oh, you're such a slob. You could try something like, hey, when I see your socks on the floor, I feel frustrated because I need more order in our shared space.
So it's about connecting the dots between what I'm seeing, how it makes me feel, and what need of mine isn't being met in that moment.
Exactly. It's like you're holding up a mirror to the situation and to yourself. And that can be really powerful for both people involved.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. But let's be honest, sometimes those needs are clashing, right? Like my need for order and their need for whatever comfort or freedom or whatever it is.
Absolutely. And that's where the fourth and final component of NVC comes in: the request.
All right, lay it on me. How do we make a Rosenberg-approved request?
It's all about being specific and actionable. Instead of, I wish you were tidier, try something like, would you be willing to put your socks in the hamper before bed tonight?
Okay, so no more vague complaints or passive-aggressive sighs, just a clear, direct request.
Exactly. And by framing it as a question, would you be willing?
Mm.
You're subtly acknowledging their autonomy, their choice in the matter. It's not a demand, it's an invitation to collaborate.
I love that. So much better than me nagging them about it for the next week.
And you know what else is great about NVC? Is it gives us tools to deal with even the most challenging emotions, like anger.
Okay, because so far we've been talking about these kind of low-grade disagreements, but what about those moments when you're really fired up? Can NVC really handle those situations?
That's where it really shines. Actually, Rosenberg actually dedicates a whole chapter to anger in the book. And he sees anger not as something to suppress or be ashamed of, but as a powerful signal.
A signal for what? That somebody's being a jerk.
Well, it could be a sign of that, but more importantly, it's a signal that a need of yours isn't being met. Think about it, that feeling of anger, even rage, it's trying to tell you something.
Okay, so instead of yelling at the guy who just cut me off in traffic, NVC would say, what did they do? Take a deep breath and ask yourself, what need of mine is feeling trampled on right now?
Exactly. Maybe it's a need for safety on the road. Maybe it's a need for respect from other drivers. Whatever it is, once you pinpoint that unmet need, it allows you to shift from blame to empathy.
Empathy for the guy who just cut me off.
That's a tough one. It is. But remember that story about Rosenberg getting cut off himself?
Oh, yeah, he didn't exactly let it slide, did he?
No, he didn't. But he didn't yell at the guy either. He pulled up alongside him and said something like, hey, I felt scared when you cut me off because my need for safety felt really strong in that moment.
No way. And the guy just gave him the finger and drove off, right?
Nope. He actually apologized.
Mm.
Turns out he was late to pick up his kid from school and was totally stressed out.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how expressing your needs vulnerably, even in a tense situation, can disarm the other person.
Okay, that's pretty amazing. And it makes sense, right? Because we all have those moments where we're not at our best, where we make mistakes. But if we can come from a place of understanding even a little bit, it can totally change the dynamic.
Absolutely. It's about seeing the humanity in each other, even when it's hard. And you know what's cool is that this whole NVC thing isn't just for communicating with others, it's also incredibly powerful for communicating with ourselves.
Oh, tell me about it. My inner critic could use a serious dose of NVC.
Right. We can be so harsh on ourselves, constantly judging and criticizing. Rosenberg talks about the importance of self-compassion, especially when we mess up.
So instead of that inner voice screaming, you idiot, it's more like, hey, what's up with that? What's going on here?
Exactly. It's about understanding the why behind our actions, even the ones we regret. He suggests this three-step process for moving from self-judgment to self-compassion.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's step one?
First up, own it. What did you do that you're judging yourself for? Be specific. No need to sugarcoat it.
All right, I can handle that. Then what?
Step two is crucial. Acknowledge that you chose to do those things. You weren't forced. It wasn't inevitable. You made a choice.
Even if it was a choice made in the heat of the moment or without thinking it through.
Especially then. Because owning our choices, even the messy ones, reminds us that we have agency. We're not helpless victims of our impulses. And that brings us to step 3.
Let me guess. Figuring out what need I was trying to meet when I made that choice.
Bingo. And this is where the real self-discovery happens. It's like we're playing detective with our own lives.
I like that. So instead of beating myself up for procrastinating on that big project, I could ask myself, what need was I trying to meet when I chose to scroll through social media for 3 hours instead of working on that presentation?
Exactly. And maybe the answer is you needed a break from the pressure. Maybe you were feeling overwhelmed and needed a distraction. Whatever it is, you're not judging yourself. You're seeking to understand.
This is huge. It's like shifting from I'm so stupid to I see you, I hear you, I understand you. And that's got to be the foundation for any kind of self-compassion, right?
100%.
Yeah.
You can't have self-compassion without first understanding and accepting yourself, even the parts you don't like.
This reminds me of that story Rosenberg tells about spilling ink on his brand new suit.
Oh, the infamous ink-stained suit.
Right.
A classic example of turning self-judgment into self-compassion.
He was so angry with himself for ruining this perfectly good suit, but then he used NVC on himself and realized he was just trying to connect with some folks who wanted his contact info after a seminar.
He was so focused on giving them what they needed that he absent-mindedly put the uncapped pen in his pocket. Ink disaster.
Right. But instead of wallowing in self-pity or anger, he was able to see the good intention behind his actions, and that's what allowed him to forgive himself.
Exactly. And that's the power of NVC. It's not about being perfect. It's about bringing compassion to our imperfections, both in ourselves and in others.
This has been amazing. We've talked about NVC with others, NBC with ourselves, even road rage. What else is there? You know, one thing we haven't touched on yet is how NVC approaches appreciation.
Oh yeah, it's not just about navigating conflict. It's also about expressing gratitude and appreciation in a way that's truly heart-centered.
Okay, because at first glance, it seems like thank you and good job should cover it, right?
Well, Rosenberg actually distinguishes between appreciation and what he calls praise, which often has a hidden layer of judgment even when we have good intentions.
Okay, so telling someone, you're such a talented artist, could actually backfire, even if I genuinely mean it.
It's subtle, but by praising their talent, you're kind of setting yourself up as the judge of what's good art. Like your opinion is the one that matters.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. But how do you express genuine appreciation without that judgmental undertone?
Instead of focusing on your evaluation of their skill, try sharing the impact their art has had on you. So instead of, you're so talented, you might say, when I look at your painting, I feel this sense of peace, like all the tension just melts away.
Yeah.
I really needed that today.
So it's less about me being impressed with their abilities and more about me being vulnerable and sharing how their art makes me feel.
Exactly. And that vulnerability, that's where the real connection happens. It's no longer about evaluation. It's about shared experience.
This is blowing my mind. I'm realizing how often I use language without really thinking about the impact of my words. But that's what's so great about this book. It's like shining a light on all those unconscious communication patterns we fall into.
Totally.
Yeah.
And once you start seeing those patterns, you can't unsee them.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, how do I want to communicate differently? How do I want to show up in the world?
It's like learning a new language, the language of empathy and compassion. And like any new language, it takes practice and patience.
But the rewards are huge. Imagine a world where we all spoke this language, where we listened to understand instead of judge, where we focused on needs instead of blame.
It's a beautiful vision. And you know what? I think we all have that capacity within us to choose compassion, to choose connection, even in the midst of conflict.
Absolutely. It's not always easy, but it's always a choice. And every time we make that choice, we're creating ripples of positive change.
So to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep connecting. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into nonviolent communication. It's been real, folks. Until next time.